When it comes to the future, some people are really looking forward to it, and some people are kind of dreading it, but everybody can agree on one thing. It's going to come whether we like it or not. Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam. I've been living with MS for 40 years. And things keep changing, sometimes faster than I can even imagine. Recently, I was listening to a podcast from John Strum called Real Talk MS. He keeps up with the latest developments in MS, and he often has people on that he interviews. It's very interesting. If you don't follow that one, you might want to subscribe to it. But anyway, I'm going to play you a clip from the most recent one that I listened to, where he talks about a couple of stories involving artificial intelligence and its likely impact on multiple sclerosis.
Repurposing a drug means finding a new medical use for an existing, already approved medication. As you might imagine, this significantly reduces the time, cost, and risk of developing a new drug because the safety profile of an existing drug is already well established. This allows researchers to focus on testing the drug's efficacy for a different disease with faster clinical trial timelines and lower development costs. Now, the challenge in this process is finding an efficient way to identify a drug that might be a candidate for repurposing. One way to make this process less challenging could be to use artificial intelligence. And that's exactly what global healthcare group Cosmos Health is doing with their AI-powered drug repurposing platform called CloudScreen. Using CloudScreen as their starting point, Cosmos Health has identified an already marketed drug that can potentially be repurposed for treating MS. Now, we don't know the name of this drug quite yet, as Cosmos has applied for a patent for a unique mechanism of action that their team has discovered. For quite a long time on this podcast, we've been talking about the ways that AI will have a profound impact on virtually every aspect of healthcare. CloudScreen and the discovery of a potential new treatment for MS are just two more examples of the AI revolution that you and I are living through. We'll keep you posted on this potential new treatment as Cosmos Health makes those details available. While we're on the subject of AI, a few months ago in episode number 355 of Real Talk MS, I told you about a new version of AlphaFold, an artificial intelligence application developed by Google's artificial intelligence company, DeepMind. The key to drug discovery and development is the interaction of proteins with other molecules. And a major bottleneck in drug development is physically producing biological designs that can test how well specific proteins and molecules bind together. Because AlphaFold has mapped the behavior of all of life's molecules, including human DNA, scientists can design a molecule that will bind to a specific place on a protein and then use AlphaFold to accurately predict how strongly it's going to bind, which reduces the time and money needed to develop potentially life-changing treatments. DeepMind also released a free online tool that scientists can use to test their hypotheses with just a few clicks of their mouse before running real-world tests. Since 2021, AlphaFold's AI predictions have been made freely accessible to researchers as part of a database containing more than 200 million protein structures. When I first told you about AlphaFold, I said that this latest version brings AI-driven drug development a major step closer. And a couple of weeks ago at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, Nobel laureate and DeepMind CEO Demis Hassabis announced that he expects to see pharmaceutical drugs designed by artificial intelligence to be in clinical trials by the end of this year. Now, while this news isn't specifically about a drug for multiple sclerosis, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see one developed sooner rather than later, because DeepMind is focusing this initiative on neuroscience, using AI to help scientists understand specific functions that occur at the cellular level in the brain. Might this help researchers understand the specific cause or causes of MS? Might it help our understanding of MS progression in the absence of relapse activity? Could it uncover that specific mechanism that's causing the hidden persistent inflammation in MS? Right now, the best answer I can offer is maybe. But as I say that, what I hope you're hearing in the background is the sound of real scientific progress.
Well, of course, I had to go out and find more information about this. I saw this in the Register. It was published on Wednesday, 22nd January of 2025. It's called Google DeepMind CEO says 2025 is the year we start popping pills AI helped invent. Now that'll get your attention. Nobel Prize winner Demis Hassabis thinks human trials will happen soon. And they say that clinical trials of the first drugs designed with the help of artificial intelligence could commence this year, Google DeepMind CEO Demis Hassabis suggested Tuesday. Speaking on a panel at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Hassabis, who also runs DeepMind drug discovery spin-off Isomorphic Labs, said he expected to have some AI-designed drugs in clinical trials by the end of the year. That's the plan. Isomorphic Labs has tried to speed up the development of medicines using machine learning since 2021. Eventually, you could imagine personalized medicine where it's optimized maybe overnight by an AI system for your personal metabolism, he said. AI hype is currently omnipresent, though Hassabis and his colleague John Jumper earned a Nobel Prize for work on AlphaFold, a deep learning system that can predict protein structures. Pharmaceutical companies are interested in AI because it has the potential to save them lots of time and money. According to a recent article published in the journal Nature Medicine, successfully creating a new drug and having it approved for use can take 12 to 15 years and costs roughly $2.6 billion. Many drugs are never approved for use, as fewer than 10% of clinical trials in which humans consume the drug succeed. Anything that can reduce costs, speed development, or increase success rates will make a material impact on pharma companies' bottom lines. Researchers believe there are many ways in which machine learning models can improve and speed parts of the drug discovery process. Hassabis believes huge savings in time and cost could be possible. Optimism of that sort needs to be tempered because high-quality training data is hard to come by due to privacy regulations, data sharing policies, and acquisition costs. Hassabis believes these challenges aren't insurmountable. You can generate some key data to fill in the gaps of where the public data doesn't have it, he said. This can be done in collaboration with clinical research organizations or through the use of synthetic data, something he said AlphaFold 2 used extensively. However, as we've previously discussed, synthetic data can be problematic. You've got to be very careful if you're using synthetic data that it's actually correctly representing the distribution and you're not somehow training on your own errors, Hassabis said. Hassabis doesn't think AI will replace scientists anytime soon. True invention is not possible yet with AI. It can't come up with a new hypothesis or new conjecture. It can maybe solve a complicated conjecture in, say, maths. I think we're very close to some big breakthroughs on that front. I think we'll actually see that this year. But that's different from actually coming up with the theory or the hypothesis as the best human scientists do, he said. Hassabis is not alone in exploring the application of machine learning on drug discovery. NVIDIA has also shown enthusiasm for AI-augmented drug discovery, perhaps because it will create more reasons to buy its hardware. Last northern autumn, NVIDIA open-sourced its BioNeMo family of GPU-accelerated machine learning frameworks for drug development and molecular design. The company has also taken steps to repackage existing models like DeepMind's AlphaFold 2 and MIT's DiffDock 2.0 as microservices to make them easier to consume. NVIDIA is also partnering with major pharma companies, including Danish pharmaceutical giant Novo Nordisk, in order to bring new research systems online. Denmark's Getheon supercomputer, which applies machine learning to biological sciences and the development of new treatments, is one example of such efforts. I found some background in MIT Technology Review, and they say this is the reason Demis Hassabis started DeepMind. They say that a year after it took biologists by surprise, AlphaFold has changed how researchers work and set DeepMind on a new course. And this was published on February 23rd, 2022. So it's not exactly cutting edge, but I think it'll give us some good background. And they say that in March 2016, Demis Hassabis, CEO and co-founder of DeepMind, was in Seoul, South Korea, watching his company's AI make history. AlphaGo, a computer program trained to master the ancient board game Go, played a 5-game match against Lee Sedol, a top Korean pro, with the second highest number of international championship wins to his name at that time. Many consider Go the world's most complex board game. It takes years to master. Lee predicted he would beat DeepMind's AI in a landslide, but AlphaGo won 4-1. Its victory shocked Go and AI experts alike and changed the world's perception of what AI can do. But while the DeepMind team was celebrating, Hassabis was already thinking about an even bigger challenge. He remembers standing backstage with David Silver, who led the development of AlphaGo. I said to him, "Now is the time." Watching DeepMind's AI play Go, Hassabis realized that his company's technology was ready to take on one of the most important and complicated puzzles in biology, one that researchers had been trying to solve for 50 years, predicting the structure of proteins. The three-dimensional structure of proteins determines how they behave and interact in the body, but a large number of important proteins have structures that biologists still don't know. Using AI to accurately predict them would offer an invaluable tool to help understand diseases from cancer to COVID. Proteins are a primary target for many drugs and a key ingredient for new therapeutics. Quickly unlocking their structures would fast-track the development of new therapies and vaccines. So you can see that it's a quick step from here to trialing new drugs. In 2020, DeepMind, which is owned by Alphabet, revealed AlphaFold 2, an AI that could predict the shape of proteins down to the nearest atom. It's the most complex thing we've ever done, says Hassabis. AlphaFold's success is part of a bigger story, too, signaling a change of direction for the AI lab. The company's focus is shifting from games to science, where it hopes to have a bigger real-world impact. Taking on scientific problems is the culmination of what Hassabis set out to achieve, and it's what he wants to be known for. "This is the reason I started DeepMind," he said. "In fact, it's why I've worked my whole career in AI." Hassabis has been thinking about proteins on and off for 25 years. He was introduced to the problem when he was an undergraduate at the University of Cambridge in the 1990s. A friend of mine there was obsessed with this problem, he says. He would bring it up at any opportunity, in the bar, playing pool, telling me that if we could just crack protein folding, it would be transformational for biology. His passion always stuck with me. That friend was Tim Stevens, who is now a Cambridge researcher working on protein structures. "Proteins are the molecular machines that make life on Earth work," Stevens says. "Nearly everything your body does, it does with proteins. They digest food, contract muscles, fire neurons, detect light, power immune responses, and much more. Understanding what individual proteins do is therefore crucial for understanding how bodies work, what happens when they don't, and how to fix them. A protein is made up of a ribbon of amino acids, which chemical forces fold up into a knot of complex twists and twirls. The resulting 3D shape determines what it does. For example, hemoglobin, a protein that ferries oxygen around the body and gives blood its red color, is shaped like a little pouch, which lets it pick up oxygen molecules in the lungs. The structure of SARS-CoV-2 spike protein lets the virus hook onto your cells. And here's an illustration. A model generated by AlphaFold shows how amino acids fold to form proteins, and this is courtesy of DeepMind. The catch is that it's hard to figure out a protein's structure, and thus its function, from the ribbon of amino acids. An unfolded ribbon can take 10 to greater than 300 possible forms, a number on the order of all the possible moves in a game of Go. Predicting this structure in a lab using techniques such as X-ray crystallography is painstaking work. Entire PhDs have been spent working out the folds of a single protein. The long-running CASP, or Critical Assessment of Structure Prediction, competition was set up in 1994 to speed things up by pitting computerized prediction methods against each other every 2 years. But no technique ever came close to matching the accuracy of lab work. By 2016, progress had been flatlining for a decade. Within months of its AlphaGo success in 2016, DeepMind hired a handful of biologists and set up a small interdisciplinary team to tackle protein folding. The first glimpse of what they were working on came in 2018, when DeepMind won CASP 13, outperforming other techniques by a significant margin. But beyond the world of biology, few paid much attention. That changed when AlphaFold 2 came out 2 years later. Its landslide victory in CASP 14 marked the first time an AI had predicted protein structure with an accuracy matching that of models produced in an experimental lab, often with margins of error just the width of an atom. Biologists were stunned by just how good it was. Watching AlphaGo play in Seoul, Hasabi says he'd been reminded of an online game called Folded, which a team led by David Baker, a leading protein researcher at the University of Washington, released in 2008. Folded asked players to explore protein structures represented as 3D images on their screens by folding them up in different ways. With many people playing, the researchers behind the game hoped some data about the probable shapes of certain proteins might emerge. It worked, and Folded players even contributed to a handful of new discoveries. Hasabi's played that game when he was a postdoc at MIT in his 20s. He was struck by the way basic human intuition could lead to real breakthroughs, whether making a move in Go or finding a new configuration in Folded. I was thinking about what we had actually done with AlphaGo, said Hasabi. We'd mimicked the intuition of incredible Go masters. I thought if we can mimic the pinnacle of intuition in Go, then why couldn't we map that across to proteins? The two problems weren't so different in a way. Like Go, protein folding is a problem with such vast combinatorial complexity that brute force computational methods are no match. Another thing Go and protein folding have in common is the availability of lots of data about how the problem could be solved. AlphaGo used an endless history of its own past games. AlphaFold used existing protein structures from the Protein Databank, an international database of solved structures that biologists have been adding to for decades. AlphaFold 2 uses attention networks, a standard deep learning technique that lets an AI focus on specific parts of its input data. This tech underpins language models like GPT-3, where it directs the neural network to relevant words in a sentence. Similarly, AlphaFold 2 is directed to relevant amino acids in a sequence, such as pairs that might sit together in a folded structure. They wiped the floor with the CASP competition by bringing together all these things biologists have been pushing toward for decades and then just acing the AI, said Stevens. Over the past year, AlphaFold 2 has started having an impact. DeepMind has published a detailed description of how the system works and released the source code. It has also set up a public database with the European Bioinformatics Institute that it is filling with new protein structures as the AI predicts them. The database currently has about 800,000 entries, and DeepMind says it will add more than 100 million, nearly every protein known to science, in the next year. A lot of researchers still don't fully grasp what DeepMind has done, says Charlotte Dean, chief scientist at Exscientia, an AI drug discovery company based in the UK, and head of the Protein Informatics Lab at the University of Oxford. Dean was one of the reviewers of the paper that DeepMind published on AlphaFold in the scientific journal Nature last year. It's changed the questions you can ask, she says. A handful of teams around the world have started using AlphaFold in work on antibiotic resistance, cancer, COVID, and more. Roland Dunbrack at the Fox Chase Cancer Center in Philadelphia is one early adopter. He leads a team that has been using computers to predict protein structures for years. Other teams at the lab then use these structures to guide their experiments. AlphaFold has introduced an unprecedented level of accuracy to Dunbrack's work. They are accurate enough to make biological judgments from, to interpret mutations in a cancer gene, he says of its predictions. We always tried to do that with computer-generated models before, but we were often wrong. When colleagues ask him to model proteins, Dunbrack says he can now be more confident in what he gives them. Otherwise, he says, I get really nervous, worried that they'll come back to me and say, we wasted all this money and your model was terrible, it didn't work. AlphaFold can still make mistakes, but when it works well, it can be hard to tell the difference between its predictions and a structure produced in the lab, says Dunbrack. He runs AlphaFold predictions on a computer platform called CollabFold, hosted by Harvard University and running on Google GPUs. Every night I set up one before I go to sleep, and they take a few hours to run, he says. It's a super useful tool that everyone in my lab is using, says Clement Verba, a structural biologist at the University of California, San Francisco. Verba mostly works on cancer, but in the early weeks of the COVID-19 pandemic, he joined a loose consortium of researchers studying the SARS-CoV-2 virus. In particular, he wanted to figure out how its proteins hijacked host proteins. Verba and his colleagues had produced part of the structure for the viral protein they were interested in, but they were missing a piece. Many proteins have multiple domains, densely folded sections, a few hundred amino acids long, that can each have a separate function. One domain might bind to DNA, another might bind to another protein, and so on. They're multi-headed beasts, said Dunbrack. Structurally, domains are like knots in a rope, connected by loose looping strands that flop around. In the protein he was studying, Verba's team had figured out the rough shape of the rope, but not the detailed structure of all the knots. Without that detail, there was little they could say about how it worked. They realized, though, that this protein was one of those DeepMind had already run through AlphaFold and shared online. AlphaFold's prediction wasn't perfect, the looping strands weren't quite right, but it had the shape of the protein's 4 domains. The researchers took AlphaFold's predictions for the domains and lined them up with the rough shape they had. It was remarkably close. I remember that moment when I saw it fit, said Verba. It was amazing. We were now the only ones in the world with the full structure. They published their findings soon after. Verba thinks AlphaFold's strength lies in finding structures for proteins that have not yet been fully studied. Many of the proteins we care about have been studied for decades, he says. People have spent careers chipping away at them, so we have a pretty good idea of what they look like, but that still leaves a lot of uncharted territory. Verba is interested in kinases, for example. Kinases are enzymes that play a crucial role in regulating the normal function of cells. If they stop working properly, they can cause cancer. Only around half of the 500 or so kinases in the human body are well understood. The remainder is known as the dark kinome. Researchers like Verba and Dunbrack are interested in developing cancer drugs that target the kinome. But this is where AlphaFold's limitations kick in. Because working out the structure of a protein in the lab is costly, it is typically done only once the protein has been picked as a promising candidate, which might be months into the drug discovery process. The hope, Dean says, is that AlphaFold could reverse that sequence, making the pipeline move faster. Now I can start with the structure. I can identify where it has pockets on the surface, places where I can bind drug molecules, she says. Yet, as Dean acknowledges, you need more than a static structure to fully understand how a drug and a protein might interact. Proteins do not stay still. Their structures can cycle through subtle reconfigurations. A lot of the time, these small transformations are the crux of biological function, says Verba. What's more, a protein may be open to receiving a drug in one state but not others. And judging from what researchers are seeing so far, AlphaFold appears to predict the most common state of these structures, which may not be the state that is important for drug development. Proteins can also change shape when drugs bind to them, which can affect how the drug works. In the worst-case scenario, a drug binding to a protein can have unpredictable knock-on effects on adjoining proteins, potentially even reversing what the drug was designed to do, for example, activating rather than inhibiting some function. Ola Engqvist, head of molecular AI and discovery sciences at AstraZeneca, thinks that AI-generated structures will help identify drug targets eventually, but not yet. To be transformational, AlphaFold needs to be followed by better computational methods to understand protein dynamics and handle larger protein complexes, he says. DeepMind plans to address many of these issues in the next version of the program. One line of work is to generate multiple variations of a protein's shape to try and capture its dynamics. The way a protein moves is governed by complex chemistry and physics, so a full moving model may require feeding AlphaFold large amounts of extra information about this process. A downside of this approach could be that the information might act as a constraint, degrading the tool's predictive abilities. Last summer, DeepMind released AlphaFold Multimer, which is designed to predict the structure of protein complexes, superstructures made of multiple proteins clumped together, but it is much less accurate than AlphaFold and prone to more glaring errors. Stupid mistakes are a feature of even the best AI. AlphaGo made a basic error in the one game it lost to Lee Sedol, says Hassabis. You can think of it a bit like a bug, he said. But the problem is that it's a bug in its knowledge. You can't just go in and debug it. That's because you can't easily tinker with a neural network without fundamentally affecting how it works. Hard-coded fixes damage an AI's ability to learn because how does it know when to use them, says Hassabis. It goes against the point of learning. Instead, DeepMind is gathering examples of AlphaFold's worst mistakes and training it to handle them properly. Hassabis wants researchers to break AlphaFold to find out what doesn't work and share the results with his team so that they can make the next AlphaFold even better. With AlphaFold, DeepMind is starting a new chapter. The company is investing in a team called AI for Science. It has produced a flurry of publications in the last few months in fields from weather prediction to math, quantum chemistry, and fusion. None has had the impact of AlphaFold, but the breadth of ambition is clear. I haven't got a little book of problems I want to tackle, said Hassabis, but I sort of have one in mind. AlphaFold marks a new chapter for Hassabis too. In November, he announced he had a new job. He is now juggling his leadership at DeepMind with the CEO role at the startup Isomorphic Labs, a new sister company in Alphabet that will focus exclusively on bringing the power of AI to biotech and medicine. At this stage, Hassabis won't elaborate on what it will be doing. We're only just starting, so there's not a lot to say. Basically, I think there are a lot more things like AlphaFold, different aspects of the drug discovery pipeline, that would be amenable to AI, he says. I mean, really going for it, not just a little analytical tool sitting on top. In his blog post announcing Isomorphic Labs, Hassabis writes that just as mathematics turned out to be the right description language for physics, AI may turn out to play a similar role for biology. Spinning this work out into its own startup makes it easier to devote the focus and resources it needs. It wouldn't make sense to hire loads of chemists at DeepMind, he says. But it's also true that whereas DeepMind has so far stuck to pure research other than contributing to Alphabet products, the startup will be looking to capitalize on what it can bring to Big Pharma. You can think of it a little bit like what DeepMind does with Google, says Hassabis. Our research goes into hundreds of Google products. Almost every Google product you touch now has some DeepMind tech in it. You can think of Isomorphic Labs as our outlet for the real world beyond Google. AlphaFold is a beginning rather than an endpoint for Hassabis. We're going to see a kind of new renaissance in science where these AI techniques continue to get more sophisticated and get applied to a wide range of scientific fields, he says. As the AI tide rises, more problems become tractable. And of course, having found all this out, I felt it was important to go out and try to find some kind of an interview or something with Mr. Hassabis. And I was able to find one because he had been invited to speak at Davos. And for those of you who follow the World Economic Forum, you know very well that Davos is the place where they gather and have their conferences. And so this was indeed part of the World Economic Forum. Now, depending on your attitude toward the World Economic Forum, the minute you hear the word Davos, your blood pressure may go up. I don't know. But this is an interview that I think will give us some insight into his thinking and what his hopes are for the future of the technology that he has developed.
In the second part of the month, it was Demis Hassabis, co-founder and chief executive officer at Google Mind, a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry in 2024. Hassabis was at the World Economic Forum in Davos in Switzerland, and here is what he had to say about the near future.
The big advances people are expecting in the general AI space are agent-based systems that are able to kind of complete tasks on their own on behalf of the user. I think it's going to be interesting bringing that towards science. But I think AI applied to science is a lot richer than just the language models and things like AlphaFold. These are kind of bespoke models that are built using the same principles as the general models, but are then applied specifically to particular domains. And I hope, we and others are working on trying to design drugs with AI, and I think with our little spin-out company, Isomorphic, I think we'll hopefully have some AI-designed drugs in the clinical trials by the end of the year.
AlphaFold, the artificial intelligence program which performs predictions of protein structure. More than 2 million scientists that use AlphaFold are now contributing to developing new drugs, even customized for the single individual. Let's listen in the words of Hassabis.
I've always thought, can you do the search part of biology or the experimental sciences in silico, right? That's the thing that takes all the time. And then the final step, of course, you still need to validate it in the wet lab, right? Or do a clinical trial or whatever it is to make sure that your model prediction is correct, because it's not always correct. But that could, if that works in general, that could save you 10x, 100x of the time and cost, right? Clearly with virtual screening, things like that. And the number I always like to give is that not only did we, you can fold obviously a protein and get the structure in a few seconds, but so we ended up folding all of them, 200 million known to science. So that would have taken, like a rule of thumb of like 1 billion years of PhD time, because 5 years per protein. And so it's kind of mind-blowing really how much faster that could be. And then what I'm thinking is that's not the only, of course, for drug discovery or something like that, that's just one piece of the puzzle, right? Like knowing the 3D structure of the protein. And so then I was sort of thinking, why couldn't we revolutionize the whole of the drug discovery process? Bring it down from many, many years, a decade or something, to do with the average time it takes to go from target to a candidate and put it into the clinic. And why couldn't we get that down to maybe months or weeks, right? The same kind of acceleration we saw with the structures part. And so that's what we've been working on now. You've got the structure now. Can you design a chemical compound? So we're sort of moving into chemistry that binds to the right part of the protein surface, but also importantly doesn't bind to anything else. So you can do a virtual screen for not only I want the most potent thing to bind to the target in question, but I want it to be really clean drug that doesn't bind to anything else in the body. And I think eventually you could imagine personalized medicine where it's optimized maybe like overnight by an AI system for your personal metabolism to be perfect for you. And so then in more general fundamental biology, I think the way we're thinking about it, and you see that with AlphaFold 3, our work there is moving up the interaction stack. So if you think of AlphaFold 2 is essentially cracked the picture of a static protein, but biology is not static. All the interesting things are when there's dynamics and interactions happen. And AlphaFold 3 is the first sort of next step on that, where it's got pairwise interactions. The protein interacts with another protein, or protein interacts with a ligand, or protein interacts with RNA, DNA. And then, then you might think about a pathway, and then eventually my dream would be to simulate a virtual cell. The first thing is acceleration by 10x, 100x of a lot of the painstaking experimental work potentially. But I think there's also the potential for these systems to discover new areas. And of course, true invention is not possible yet with AI. Like, it can't come up with a new hypothesis or a new conjecture. It can maybe solve a complicated, say, conjecture in maths. I think we're very close to some big breakthroughs in that front. Maybe I think we'll see that this year. But that's different from actually coming up with the theory or the hypothesis as the best human scientists do. But there might be more brute force ways of doing that. You could imagine a system that maps out the current knowledge, but also understands when it's at the leaf nodes, I call it, of the existing knowledge, right? And then you could do a sort of search process from there and get to a new part of the search space that has not been explored yet. And examples of that are with our program AlphaGo, which beat the world champion sort of famously at Go, Lisa Doll, in 2016, and kind of was part of creating the modern boom that we see in AI today, sort of coming of age, if you like. Not only did it win that match, but it came up with creative moves that had never been seen before, even though we played Go for thousands of years, hundreds of years, and a couple of thousand years now. And I can imagine that was incredible to me, because that would be so useful in science to be able to discover sort of new parts of the search space. So I can see kind of techniques like that being able to be extended into some areas of science at least.
Okay, so are you dreading that, or are you looking forward to it? I'd really be interested to know. I'm really not sure how I feel about it. There's a couple of positives, I think, with the idea that one could use artificial intelligence to conduct clinical trials, because, well, when you think about all the rats and mice that have given their lives, as I've said many times, for the purpose of advancing science and testing out these drugs that are being trialed, and even more importantly, the brave men and women who agree to be the human subjects in phase 1 of the clinical trial when they're looking at basic safety concerns. Well, if all that could be done with AI, and we were reasonably sure that AI got it right, and that might be a big if, what a boon that would be. It would save some suffering, I would think, or at least inconvenience and discomfort. But of course, when we were looking at these articles, people didn't really talk about it from that perspective, did they? They were only interested in saving time, saving money, saving lab resources, whatever. You know, things that very much more in line with like a business approach, a very pragmatic approach to this thing, which, you know, is that isn't really top of mind for me, but that it will probably be the reason why AI is used in clinical trials. And the downside, of course, is, I don't know, do you really trust it? Just because AI says that it's going to be good, it's going to be fine, it's going to be safe, I actually am not sure. I have a feeling that, like most everything else, you may not want to be in the front of the line to try it out. But given that, I think we're looking at a revolution in the way things are done in many fields. So the fact that it's going to hit the medical field, it's no big surprise. Because again, this is something where there's a lot of time, money, and interest, and so there's a market there. And where there's a market, there will be innovations. And so, you know, we can't really stop the future from happening, but we can't be ignorant of it either. And that was really my purpose here in making this video. You need to start thinking about that when you start seeing articles about artificial intelligence. Try to learn something about it, because we're going to be dealing with it, and let's not have it thrust upon us. Let's find out if it's something that we want or not want, or that maybe we want to wait and see, which would probably be more my attitude is wait and see, don't be first in line. Let it work the bugs out first before you decide to try it yourself. But that's all I have for you today. So until my next video, please do continue to take really good care of yourself, and I'll see you again soon.